This is the Oasis, a whole virtual universe. You can do anything, be anyone, without going anywhere at all. The Oasis was created by James Halliday, and what he left behind changed everything. A contest. 3 impossible challenges. The first to finish gets complete control of the Oasis, which means complete control of the future.
Shall we take it together?
Sure.
We made it! You made it! We're all here for another episode of The Film Board from The Next Reel on rashpixel.fm. We spoil movies, and tonight we are all spoiled in advance of Ready Player One because we all read the book by Ernest Cline. Is that right? I'm right about that, right? Everybody read it?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Okay, good. So we all geared up this week to go see how Steven Spielberg could bring it all to life in the theater. Well, now, that's a new concept for me because I've never thought about the fact that actually if you go to a book, that you're actually spoiling yourself on the movie. Does that count as a spoiler?
No.
No?
If you go to the end of the book and read it first,
Right.
then I
But
guess.
doesn't everybody always say that, the movie's not as good as the book?
JJ, everything comes from the Bible. And so if there's a spoiler, then the spoiler alert is done.
I don't know. I love spoilers, and maybe you all do too, because that's why you join us here. So go and find out more details about this here show and all of its sibling shows about the wide world of cinematic entertainment at thenextreel.com. Also follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at The Next Reel. But the real way to support all of the commentary and creation at The Next Reel is on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/thenextreel to get access to our show's awesomely active Discord channel and our sweet, sweet love and appreciation. You can join our interactive movie thuggery for as little as $1 a month. You guys remember when coffee cost $1? Nope, nobody does. Neither do I. I'm just saying that it doesn't cost very much at all to buy our friendship, and that's what I wanted to talk about. So we all knew the book, and we all know the movie now. So even though you people out there may have already heard some of these voices in the conversation we just had, you may not know us personally. So let's introduce our host tonight. So my question to start us off is, what pop culture presence from the 80s do you miss the most, Andy Nelson?
You mean, do I miss from the movies, or do I like from this movie, or
In the
just in
world.
general?
What do you miss about the 80s? Anything?
I miss the going to kids movies that were kind of like the Goonies, where they were a little rougher. I think.
Oh.
There's something about them that had a little more edge to them than you don't get today.
That might play into our conversation. How about you, Tommy Hansen? Do you remember the 80s?
I do. I was literally going to say the Goonies. It feels like that kind of a bunch of kids go on an adventure, but it's a little, if you've watched the Goonies recently, they swear so much. They are constantly swearing. It was just a different time. And there's something about that made you feel kind of, hey, they talk like me and adults and all this kind of stuff. And there's actual real peril involved. So I'm going to also go with the Goonies because I cannot pivot very fast.
Okay. And how about you, Steve Sarmento?
So,
the 80s.
Yes, the 80s. So I was born in 1970. So my nostalgia for the 80s is really limited to the first chunk of the 80s. And for me, it's all about the choose your own adventure books where you could read a book and you could come back to it and take a different path and read that same story like 20 different times to try to find your way to get the best ending ever. And it's one thing that I had wished they'd been able to work that in there. Cause for me, that's like like hyperlinks and internet stuff and video games where you like reset and restart, and save your game and go back. Cause I remember reading those choose your own adventures and I would put my finger and say, if you want to go to this or this, you're like, wait, I'm going to put my finger here because if I'm going to peek at that page and I see I'm coming right back here and say, no, I'm going the other way.
My favorite thing to do after I'd finished the books is go back and just read all of the bad endings. All the ones where you would get caught in the haunted house or get floated out to space or whichever one it was and just die over and over again in rapid succession. That doesn't make me a creep, right? Okay.
Well, that's not disturbing at all.
There's an interesting thing out there on the internet now where they actually show maps of the Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Ooh,
that
neat.
you can look up and see a visual representation of all those different paths. So that might be something for you to check out. I'll try to find it and see if I can get a link to it. Maybe we can put it in the show notes as well. My name is JJ, and I was 8 in 1984, and I'm personally just disappointed that there isn't a more safe space for me to stage my impassioned debate about the differing value of vehicle Voltron versus Lion Voltron. You guys have any opinions about Voltron? No?
Which one was Voltron?
Voltron is back.
A bunch
I'll
of
tell you that
robots
now.
come and make one big robot?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right. Andy, you said that both are bad?
No, they're back.
Oh, they're exactly.
My son has Voltron characters in his room.
Yes, and
It's
actually
crazy,
Netflix
yeah.
brought it back, so that's super cool.
Yeah.
And there is a place where the debate exists on the internet. It's kind of like one of those deep web Reddit things, but I'm using the microphone here to try and bring it up to the mainstream because this is the option. I'm a big vehicle Voltron fan, but the one that kind of lasted here in the States was Lion Voltron. So anyway, I just think there's a lot of interesting stuff for us to fight about regarding how we feel about the different stuff in the 80s. And more importantly for tonight, how the decade's deification in Ready Player One worked for us thugs. So let's talk about the movie. What are your initial thoughts, Steve Sarmento?
So it's Easter weekend and Steven Spielberg delivered a giant chocolate Easter bunny to us. It's mouth-watering to look at, but then you realize it's hollow on the inside, and because it's all empty calories, you're craving something more substantial about an hour later. For me, this was a movie that was grounded in 80s nostalgia, but lacked the magic that made those movies from that decade special. Or maybe I'm just a grumpy old man now.
Hollow inside. That's interesting. I think the hollowing hollowing perspective might be interesting as we talk about this movie. How about you, Tommy? What do you think of the movie?
Well, I mean, this is so much of this movie is the definition of fake things jumping on the back of fake things and fighting fake things, which is never my normal forte. That being said, at times I felt pummeled by the movie. At times I felt motion sickness. And at times I felt absolute giddiness by the imagination and the detail of the work involved. I ended up, once I sort of leaned back and realized what his overall aesthetic was going to be, while it had plenty of problems for me, ultimately I had a really great ride. And I think that's sort of where it exists for me, is a really fun ride that I don't need to go on right away again, but I had a great time.
Well, that's cool. That's good that the ride was good for you. How about you, Andy? What did you think?
It's tricky. I did have a lot of fun watching this movie. I feel a little bit like Steve. It was a little kind of empty calories, but I felt like that's kind of what the story was. I had read the book. I knew what I was kind of walking into, and I had a really fun time with it. Did I love it? No, but I really enjoyed it. And it's certainly a movie I can watch again and enjoy again. I think it's just one of those that I think is going to hold up as just a fun, entertaining movie that does its job. And I think there were some changes in the adaptation that I think made it work better as a cinema experience. I think some of the stuff would not have worked at all the way it was written. So I really appreciated the work that they went into this. And I really appreciate the work that the team did of really kind of creating this oasis with all of, so many references throughout. It was just insane. Like you would take, days just doing still frames, trying to catch them all. it's just insane. And I just really appreciate that. So I had a really fun time with it. But I do kind of agree with Steve. It is a little bit kind of a hollow, empty experience.
Yeah, and I think I'm really glad that you guys were entertained for it. Ultimately, for me, the movie was kind of a letdown, and I think we talked about it a little bit in the intro. I feel kind of spoiled by the book because I was really coming in wanting to get the feeling of nostalgia that, there's been a healthy debate about on our Discord channel about whether that kind of nostalgia is actually valuable when you're bringing together a new movie. And I think that, Andy, what you're talking about, the ability to separate from how you felt about the book, and then also from taking a look at the different medium when you come into making a film and figure out the way to make the movie a good movie. It was really hard for me to get there because I was so I was so missing what I wanted to see in the book. I have two comparisons in terms of film board work that I think is interesting to bring up when we talk about this. One of them is Valerian, where you talk about in the City of a Thousand Planets and all the different worlds that went into making Valerian. I actually liked Valerian more than this movie, but again, I didn't know the source material, so maybe I wasn't spoiled there. The other one is The Dark Tower. And I've compared, when I'm talking about this movie to people, I compare it a bit to The Dark Tower because really there was so much speculation coming into the Dark Tower about what part of the Dark Tower series that movie was going to be. And when you came to the film, you really noticed that it wasn't necessarily much related to any of the books. It was just the idea of the mythology. And that's something that they carried into Ready Player One really well, right? They have the mythology of the original story with the Oasis and with this sort of Easter egg hunt that Halliday has created for these characters. But outside of that, all of the set pieces are different. There's not an existing set piece from the book that gets translated into the film. And I think that goes to the point that you're making, Andy, about how they decided to change it up to make it a good movie. For me, it was just really hard to divorce myself from the love that I had from the book, or from even just the feelings that I had about the book going into the movie. So let's start with that. Let's start talking about those set pieces, because I think that is kind of interesting. I think the big one to talk about first is the Shining sequence. It's
my favorite.
First of all,
I love it.
Well, and if you like horror, you're going to love it. But I totally identified with the character of H, right? Like in the book, all of these characters that are in the high five are also well schooled on Halliday and all the different things that he does to set up for this Easter egg hunt. There would be no way that one of the characters in the book wouldn't know that The Shining was super important to Halliday. So it's really interesting that we come to this. And then I have never seen The Shining. I don't want to. And especially now I think I'm going to be terrified about it. But, and the other thing is that I was scared and I wasn't really schooled up on it. So I didn't have any of that nostalgia. Tommy, talk about what you loved so much about that scene.
I loved the fact that when they threw out, because a lot of the book would literally be watching a character playing an old school tabletop video game,
living in it,
or lip syncing along with the entire movie of The Breakfast Club, like things that, as has already been said, would be cinematic disasters. But for him, I really liked that Spielberg, who we know, of course, with AI taking over AI, he's such a Kubrick fan. A lot of the kids that see this movie probably haven't seen The Shining, and it's not on their radar at all. And I think for him to say, nope, we're going to school y'all, for people that know it and love it, it'll be interesting. I think a lot of people that haven't seen it, like the younger generation, he's introduced an entire new world of cinema to, potentially, in that they would want to know, what is this? What are all these crazy visuals about? Because for me, who is a Shining fan, when they walk through that door into the actual lobby of the hotel, I got shivers when it was the actual footage of the woman in the bathtub that he then that's the original footage that then he overlaid. Because when she gets out of the tub before she turns into be a real witch creature, she is naked and walks towards the character Jack Torrance, but Spielberg covered it up with H's arm.
Nice.
Right.
Like, it's really smart. I thought it was thrilling. And then to go insane once they're outside in the hedge maze, and then because there's no, JJ, just so you know, she doesn't pull out a knife. There's no zombies. There's none of that in The Shining.
Is there the blood waterfall?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
That is iconic.
Well, you say, "Oh yeah," like I should know. And this is an interesting point, right, about this movie. Like, we talk about if Spielberg is going to introduce The Shining to all these people. I think this is actually relevant to the discussion that we're having on Discord about the concept of nostalgia being important, because there is a whole generation of people who probably read the book Ready Player One and wasn't particularly interested or didn't know the significance of the events that were happening for the set pieces in the book. So it brought a new sort of perspective for me in watching the movie, because I don't know anything about The Shining. So I was like, and then when they started saying that the zombies weren't real, I was like, oh, so what of this is The Shining and one of it isn't? I didn't know.
And I would like to think that if you were more privy to horror as an option or something that you like, which a lot of people do, you would want to dive into The Shining. Because of seeing this movie.
Totally, that makes sense.
See what's real and what's not, because so much of it is such a loving tribute. And then, like a video game adaptation, it goes completely off the rails in a way that was really fascinating to me.
That's great. Steve and Andy, did you guys have the same feeling about the Shining piece?
I loved it. I thought it was a really fantastic addition that worked so much better than what was in the book, and it was done in a way where it was really it was really scary. I mean, I brought an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old to it. And walking, and all of a sudden, when they mentioned this, I'm like, oh, this is not going to go well. This is just not going to go well for me right
one
now.
For Dad.
But what they did is because it's definitely scary, and my daughter was sitting next to me, and she was kind of clinging to me through pretty much that entire sequence. And I said, don't worry, it's just from a movie, and they're just playing it out. And so she was fine. She was kind of like H. I think that the thing that I really appreciated is that even though they're kind of recreating these scenes from The Shining and reliving it out, Spielberg and his writing team imbued it with a sense of comedy still by having us kind of, living vicariously through H as she's totally freaking out.
Almost like an audience surrogate.
And so there was a slight... Right, exactly. So there's this slight level of comedy in there that I think helped, and even though it was scary for them, it was kind of like haunted house scary, and especially when the old lady brings out the axe and turns into a giant and starts slamming it into the stuff. I mean, then it just kind of goes off the rails. But it was a huge jump scare for my daughter when H is totally freaking out, and then the axe comes like through the door right behind her. Like that was a great jump scare. And it's just Spielberg they took all the stuff from The Shining and they turned it into something that was just such a beautifully done set piece, and even for kids it was done in a way where I was just so gratified that it was not over the top scary.
Did you, Andy, when your daughter was clinging to you, did you lean over and go, honey, don't worry, it's just an old movie about a father that goes insane and tries to kill his entire family? That didn't come up. I was just...
And then I gave her my best Jack Nicholson smile.
So
well, that's good.
Yeah, I was thrilled to see them using The Shining, because it was just this like love letter to The Shining from Spielberg to see that footage being reused. What I was paying attention to was looking at the places where they veered from the novel and thinking about why they made those changes. And I thought the way that they took this and tied it into the main theme of Halliday and the love story with Kira and all that, I thought they made choices and they made them in a way to really make a through line in the plot. Because the story, the novel is so much of just Willy Wonka type, with story with 80s references. And here I looked at how they were making those decisions to make changes in service of a larger story of focusing on Halliday and what's sort of at his core of who he is, why he created the Oasis, or what it is that defines him. So I appreciated that. What I did find was that made it a bit more of a challenge to then, once you veered from where the novel was going, how do you get back on track? And for me, that's where this plot sort of struggled, because we kept having to come back to the main story of Parzival and Sorrento and all of that. And that's where things fell apart for me, because they just couldn't quite weave all of that together. There was so much stuff to bring together. The movie didn't feel like it was 2.5 hours long, but I still feel like they shortchanged so many things in this film. I really wish this had been like a 4 or 5 part miniseries to really get into this vast story of characters, the rich environments, all of that. But I did like the changes that they did make from the novel. I think they made smart choices. They just didn't have enough room to get everything in there.
Yeah, and part of that shortchanging is a little bit unavoidable when you come to the screen. So I'd like to give a little bit of grace about that. I think the things that you guys are mentioning here, especially as fans or people who are knowledgeable about The Shining, I think that's really insightful and actually a bit profound to think that Steven Spielberg came to this and he took the sort of the mythology or the philosophy of nostalgia and then wrote a nice sort of clever love letter to one of his favorite directors. I think that's kind of special. That makes me feel feel really good about it and feel really creative in a way to approach a movie like this. The question that I have about like bringing up that kind of nostalgia is this the same kind of hatred as people attach to having old movies that everybody loved remade or rebooted and stuff like that? It feels different to me a little bit. This movie does, because in general, they're assembling these things. I mean, you talk about the creative thing that Spielberg did with The Shining here. It's not just making a new Shining with a whole bunch of new actors and new technology. It's actually integrating it into a story. So I guess the question that I have about this is the hate that we're seeing from the people who don't like nostalgia just the same as saying, I don't want to keep seeing remakes, I want original ideas? Or is it something different? Because this is a different way to innovate with great old ideas.
Yeah, I mean, this is an original idea. It's just incorporating a lot of old stuff, and it's about people who are kind of living through this world that this guy created, and all of this stuff is in it. It's a tricky thing, though. I don't know if what the line is there, as far as is he? Is it really going to be that different? Like, is that kind of the hater nature of that stuff? I mean, I'd like to believe that hating just kind of like the Ghostbusters remake or RoboCop remake or whatever it's going to be. This is different. But I feel like there is something about projects that are dealing in nostalgia right now. Maybe it's just because it's become so common that this is still, some of that hatred is still spilling over into this.
Could
one.
it be a reaction to the fact that brand recognition, Hollywood believes that that's the only way to make money moving forward, even though they're proved wrong over and over again? But could it be seen from fanboys as that it's like a bunch of, it's kind of like the Sorrento version of a bunch of older white men taking something that belongs to us and we love and getting it wrong and trying to sell it back to us. And therefore it comes across as pandering. It comes across as condescending. And something like this could get lost in that kind of whirlwind if people are feeling like you're trying to commoditize. Nope, it's not a word. What's the word?
Commoditize. That's a word.
I'm going to
sure.
say mine. Commomonize the something that we love that is a part of our culture, and trying to just really slight it and then sell it back to us in a way that, even though you don't understand it, in the way that Sorrento needed all of his quote unquote geeks in his ear because he didn't know what the high school was and Breakfast Club, all of that. Is that a possibility?
Well, one of the things that got to be a big fight on our Discord channel was about the movie posters that were used to promote the movie, because it took a whole bunch of old, specifically 80s movies, and then added the cast of Ready Player One to it in the same sort of styles. And there were some people who felt like that was pandering, and there were some people who felt like that was really cool and a really clever way to go at the movie. I would argue that I have a completely different take on it now after I've seen the movie, because I feel like in general the movie doesn't really spend that much time with particularly 80s nostalgia. I feel like it was more of just a marketing campaign to say, this is the philosophy, this is the theory, this is the creative idea that built this story, and so we're going to market it this way. But then you're going to come and see this movie that we created that really was, Spielberg or the movie treatment of how to take that philosophy and put it together on screen. So I don't think like it was pandering, but I can see their argument when, again, like there were no Breakfast Club references in the entire movie. Were there? Did I miss one?
The names of the high school.
Yeah, the high school.
He was trying to quiz Sorrento on it, and Sorrento only got it right because of his Geek Squad.
Right. Gotcha.
But no, I think that all the people that were complaining, I think if they actually see the film, they will find, like you just said, JJ, it wasn't like that. It wasn't just it wasn't vomiting up something that we liked and trying to put a new bow on it. It was really repurposing it, and at times really in a loving, smart, new way.
Except for when H is like, I'm just practicing Mario Kart. I mean, like there were a lot of toss away lines that weren't, I mean, it wasn't consistent. I want to agree with you, but I just don't, it didn't do it for me, unfortunately.
Some of that stuff sounds like old people writing for young people. Like that's not how young people would talk. Yes, I agree.
Well, what's interesting is who they brought on to bring this book to the screen. So you've got Ernest Cline working on the screenplay, but you also have Zach Penn. And if you go back to his first produced screenplay, it's Last Action Hero.
Okay.
which is dealing with the same thing of the kid going into the movie. And so again, you've got that sort of twist on nostalgia when you've got movies that are sort of self-referential and it's all the inside, geekery jokes, things like that. So if Arnold Schwarzenegger isn't Arnold Schwarzenegger, but a character, and he goes into a video store, Sylvester Stallone is starring in all the movies that we know Arnold Schwarzenegger starring. So it plays with that nostalgia and familiarity. So I saw the same thing sort of going on here of taking those nostalgic elements, putting them in a new context. So there's that familiar reference point, which is, to me, can work for entertainment value, but can also be used, I think, to shortcut emotional connections to things, because you're drawing on all the associations that people have with those things. So you can just imbue a scene with a certain feeling because you've got that piece to it. For me, it was done a lot with the music, when Parzival pulls out his Zemeckis cube and we get the musical cues from Back to the Future before he unleashes that thing, just brought a whole wave of, for me, memories and what I associate those little sort of chimes with. It just was overwhelming of like, oh my gosh, everything's coming together in a certain way. And it can work really well when executed properly. And I think it did it there, but there's other points where I think, for like JJ, he has no association, and that's the risk you take. Because for me, when I think of The Shining, I think of, elevator, unleashing a tidal wave of blood. And I think of two creepy girls standing in a hallway. Those are the sort of iconic memory touchstones a lot of people have with The Shining. So it's perfect. That and the, Jack Nicholson coming through the door. Clearly we couldn't get the rights to Jack Nicholson for this movie. So they dealt with the other two things, but that's the risk you take, is you're either reaching out to people and really tugging at the heartstrings, or it's a complete miss because they don't have that reference. And so I think that's the risk that a movie like this takes, is you can really hit them head on, or you're going to miss them completely.
Well, and I think that how they made those choices were really interesting. I think the question that a lot of people had coming into this, especially for those of us that have read the book and everyone on the podcast has, is how they were going to go about getting the rights for all of these different references.
I can't imagine.
And how they would make choices.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like only a person like Spielberg attached to this could get it done, because how many of those people that they're making calls to are going to say, no, you can't take this property because I know you won't treat it right. But then they say, well, Spielberg's directing. Oh, okay. Here, give me $13,000 and we can make it work.
Did he have an army of lawyers in charge of trying to clear all these rights? I would think that would just take forever. I can't imagine doing that kind of work.
Reading about it, they had a lady named Deirdre Bax, who is the special project supervisor, and producer Christy McCosco Krieger. They spent years working on securing all the rights.
It really
for
was
all
years?
of the stuff in here.
That's what I would have thought.
It was
Holy
years
cow.
that it said. Ultraman was in the book. There are a couple that I was confused, or I was wondering about. Ultraman was big in the book, and I guess the character of Ultraman happened to be going under a big legal dispute while they were trying to do this, so they could never get Ultraman, and so they replaced Ultraman with Iron Giant.
Oh, okay.
It's a better choice for me.
Yeah, I thought so too. The other one for me that was a little perplexing is the music from Rush that is so constantly mentioned in the book,
and it's in the trailer,
and it's in the trailer, but there's not a single track from Rush in the entirety of the film, and that was a big perplexing one for me. That, like, what happened when they were getting to this point? Why did they decide to drop that and just kind of go with? I mean, a lot of other great '80s tunes, but I couldn't figure out why Rush was left out, but. Yeah, it's just amazing. And looking through the list of stuff that they did clear, and just even a small sense, I mean, it's just insane how many things that they cleared for this.
Well, and I thought some of the current references were interesting. And I on first thought watching the film, I was a little bit frustrated with it. Like I was kind of being a fanboy, a purist as I was approaching this film and thinking like Iron Giant's from '99. Why is this with all this '80s thing? But there's no reason to be a purist about the book when the movie takes place in 2045, because of course, things that came out in 1999 are going to have the same sort of reverence, maybe not exactly the same, but you're going to have that sort of thing. And then they have all the Overwatch heroes, right? All the from the first-person shooter from Blizzard right now. Overwatch has Tracer is in it constantly. She always shows up as one of the fighters and things like that. And they have lots of different video games that are, almost
Minecraft
current
World.
right now. Yeah, Minecraft World.
Halo.
These are things that, so
Which is 2001.
they almost, they made these things a little bit more current, which again, it speaks to what you guys are saying in that, let's not be purist about it. Let's figure out what actually is appropriate based on the mythology. And that tripped me up when I was approaching the movie, but it makes sense when you think about the world building as a whole.
I appreciate that kind of stuff because I don't know. I mean, I feel like we can talk about how he handled huge battle scenes and trying to spot different creatures and stuff with cinematography and things like that. But I really feel that I probably recognized maybe a fourth of the references going on. Yeah.
There are so many things on screen. It's nigh impossible. You need to freeze frame it all.
Right.
Yeah. And that's, we can get to that. But that was an interesting choice of how when he got all of these rights and cleared all these rights, that it was so much of a wash in the big fight scenes that the camera was moving so fast that for me, it was weird. Like I had trouble sometimes concentrating on the actual action because I was like, was that a gremlin? Who was that? Who's that person? I recognize that from Halo, like 1 in 15 things. And then a bunch of anime people walk by and I'm like, I have no idea who any of those are. But that was an interesting choice of like, if you actually get the rights to all these things, it's fake filmed in such a fake Whiplash style where you're just running so far. And then you get like a focus on Chucky, for instance, from Child's Play. He chooses just a couple certain things to really, and Master Chief from Halo, there's like 5 of them that get involved with a firefight. But do you think that maybe it was a thought that people will want to rewatch this and freeze frame and try to pick things out because it's so frenetic during the big fights?
It's possible.
I found a site, and I'll put this in the show notes too, that lists the illusions in there, and it's just
neat.
It's so huge. It's so long, and it's not numbered. I wish it was, because that would be shocking. But I mean, there's stuff that did you know that they referenced the Zapruder film from the JFK assassination? I missed that. There's
Wow.
tons. There's.
Why was
they
that
talk
in
about
there?
Midworld, so they talk about the Dark Tower series. I could just pick out from anywhere here. They talk about Planet Greyhawk from Dungeons and Dragons. They talk about they have Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in there someplace. I mean, there's lots of different things that it's impossible to catch. So that job that those 2 women did for so many years, it was unbelievably sophisticated and difficult to coordinate that. And that alone should be looked at in this film because it's got to set some records for that, right? I mean,
I would assume so. I mean, and to your point though, Tommy, you're right. I mean, it's almost overwhelming how much stuff is in here, but to that end though, I mean, this is like an insanely brilliant job of world building. And sure, it's impossible to figure out everything as you're watching it, but at the same time, it's all there, and it's just like this amazing just lump of just create crazy numbers of characters from all these different projects, and it's building this world to just show you how expansive it actually is. And to that end, I'll never be able to pinpoint all of them, but they're all there, and I really appreciate that.
I guess I would have just liked. Sometimes I thought with some of his fake, and I keep saying the word fake because it's always things that take place in the Oasis, but so much of the filmmaking was so fake, swirling around. And we can get to the, I guess, I don't know if we're going to talk about the Love Leap party. Where they're swirling around.
Right.
He does that.
The zombie dance party.
He does that
sure.
sort of no, not the zombie dance party. The one,
the dance of the ball.
Yeah,
right.
When they get it,
where he tells her
attacked.
his name.
Right.
When in the book, that's a birthday party, I believe, for Simon Pegg's character. It's not here. Here, it's just a club that they meet at. But there's just so much swirling around. I could have used a couple, let's just hang the camera there for a second and let me sort of, like Lucas would do. And let me be like, hey, there's Yoda, and there's a bunch of people that he put in later because he doesn't know how to leave his films alone, and things like that. That would have helped instead of just seeing it, it felt like I was just sprinting by a bunch of things, and if I had a chance to look at it, maybe I could have enjoyed that stuff a little bit more.
I definitely feel that way. I mean, that the camera motion. I mean, we haven't. The interesting thing is that everything we've talked about the movie right now is about the conception of the story and the way that they treated the idea that's there. When we start getting into how the film works and how making those choices actually was executed for the film, I think there's a lot to talk about there about whether they did the right things in the way that they made the movie, more than just the way that they chose to tell the story.
Well, to Tommy's point, I think what he's saying about visually of not giving us time, to me, that was the same issue I have with the story. We're moving from sequence to sequence, from plot point to plot point, that we don't have enough time to settle. I don't have any connection to any of these characters. There's no time to develop any chemistry at all between Parzival and Artemis. There's, that's why I can't come back to it's hollow, because I was entertained. I couldn't believe it was 2.5 hours long, but everything was just like pressure cooked, like Instapot film. It was just like boom, boom, boom. Let's get through all this because we have to get through these points. But there was so much telling and not enough showing. The whole exposition at the beginning, we've got all this backstory about this whole, history of the quest and who these people are. And the problem I had with it was you're just telling me things, and because visually there's so much going on. I've got visual information that I'm trying to make sense of, and you're giving me information about the story and characters at the same time. I'm having trouble knowing what to prioritize. Is this important information you're telling me or important information you're showing? Because it's two different things at the same time. And neither of them to me had any substance. And I coasted along for the ride and I had a great time. But when I come back to thinking about what is this movie trying to tell me? What is the story? There's not enough of anything there for me to pin anything on to say, this was an important story of substance that had something to say. The book didn't have anything to say. They tried to get something to say with this, I think, because by the time we get to the end, it's more important to connect to people in the real world versus online, I think is what they were trying to say. Maybe, I don't know, but because it moved so fast, there was no time to develop any through line or theme or point to the story.
It's a good point. That's part what I meant by when I said I felt pummeled by the film.
Yes,
sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want to ask a question about that, and this is jumping down to the production a little bit. But I had this as the film went on. I started to get this creeping suspicion that some of the lack of the through line and some of the pacing, including some of the jumping from scene to scene, especially in geographic locations, was part of the homage. And this goes to a really weird. And I want to ask you guys about this because I want to see if you felt this way. And this goes to a weird point that Tommy made to me years ago, long before we started doing this podcast, about a movie that lots of people remember for being horrible, and that's Showgirls, right? And okay, so the point about Showgirls that Tommy made to me these years ago is that it got to a point where the camp was realized in the film, and so they went full out and just went for it. And that it was actually brilliant in the way that they were exploring the camp of that concept as opposed to trying to make a traditionally perfect film. So I started getting this creeping suspicion when we were watching this movie that it really felt like I was watching the roughness of something like The Goonies. You guys talked about this in the intro, in the initial thoughts. When at the end, when all of a sudden they are all sitting at the truck and all the people from the stacks are sort of closing in on them in applause in this sort of like really thing that doesn't happen in real life. But we were bombarded with stuff like that in the 80s, right? Of these things when people came to films. Or you think about a movie like The Karate Kid. The reason why I bring this up right now, Steve, is because you talked about the fact that there wasn't really a through line. And we all have this memory of these movies that we grew up on that we kind of created the through line for us. But if you watch The Karate Kid now, the original Karate Kid, it's super disjointed and really broken and really strange like that. So I don't know if they were doing it on purpose, but even if you look at the scenes and the way they were shot in real life, it felt like sometimes things were shot with some like fuzzy focus and that the camera quality was a little bit lesser than we're used to seeing in the movie. And I started feeling like I was being duped into an homage for the sort of broken films that we watched in the 80s. Did any of you feel like that at all?
I'm sure Spielberg, if he listened to this podcast, he'd be like, yeah, that's what I was going for. Because I think that this movie, for me, I really like what you're saying, JJ, because one of the things that when I've had writing partners and stuff for trying to create movies, one of the things we always say is when we go back and watch older movies, it was so much easier back then. The way we were able to
didn't care.
Yeah, it would just be like a guy would come on screen and it would just freeze frame and it'd say like in a crazy font, Carl, and then give you like three elements of his personality, and you'd be like, "Yep, I'm on board." And of course, none of that is okay now for storytelling. I can't in my heart think that was actually a plan to go through. I think this movie was instead kind of all of the care went to the Oasis scenes. And this movie was also cut to the quick because it was already running long. So that's my personal feeling is that they had to take away if there was more finesse. But the idea of everyone coming out and clapping and everyone being there in the same time to have a character say, hey, everyone in the world in the movie, meet us at X. And then they do. And then the cops and everyone and the lawyers are there. That is actually really Goonies and Old School where everyone just shows up on the beach. I mean, that is interesting.
Like, how did they find them?
I love that idea. If that was on purpose, it's just hard for me to divorce that from laziness now. And so I guess I just wonder if maybe Zach Penn isn't the most nuanced writer. He might actually think this is fine to do.
Well, but to Steve's point, he's been writing this kind of movie since he was 23. His first movie was Last Action Hero. And if you look at his credits, he's listed in all these adaptations of how to bring other source material to film. Obviously we don't know, but I think, another scene where that happened was all of a sudden when he's kidnapped by the rebellion and he wakes up and all of a sudden this character that was shrouded in mystery for the whole time as they're leading us in through the Oasis, she just introduces herself as Artemis. And it's just, it's like a slam. It's like a slam into the story. Like, welcome to the rebellion. Okay, here's this character now. It felt so 80s to me. And this is me like trying desperately to forgive the story because this kind of stuff I hated in the movie. But I was thinking, what? That's a lot like the Karate Kid. That's a lot like.
I think one of the reasons, and I'll stop. I feel like I'm talking a little bit too much, and I apologize. But one of the reasons that I have also trouble getting through that is even through the 80s, Spielberg made that feel real. To Steve's point about this feeling hollow, he made those scenes, he made them work, and he made them have resonance. And this film didn't have those. That's what makes me feel like it was just sort of unfortunately, just lazy or a cheat to just go right to exactly what the audience needed. But I love your thoughts about it.
Well, and I apologize for bringing up your obsession with Showgirls, but
I love Paul Verhoeven. Verhoeven is a genius.
But that's a good place for us to go with this. So if we're going to discount that possible theory about like let's make it so bad it's good, which of the characters did feel real to you? How did you feel about Ty Sheridan in his lead role here as Z Parzival?
It's tricky because I mean I really like Ty Sheridan. I think he's a really great actor, very enjoyable to watch, and it's been nice seeing him just kind of get better as he's gotten older. I think he worked for the most part here, but there's so much of it where you're watching him as Parzival, kind of the CG creation of him, where it's, I don't know, I guess I never really got emotionally connected to any of the characters in the film. But I mean, I enjoyed him enough. I thought it was interesting that they actually were trying to cast an unknown for this particular character, but they could never find anybody they were satisfied with, so they finally settled on Ty Sheridan.
There was no Daniel Radcliffe that jumped out of anywhere for jumping into the role of Parzival. I agree, and maybe we need to talk about these types of roles as voice acting. I don't know, when was the last time we did that on the next reel? Never on the film board.
Well, I mean, I think there's probably a lot more than voice acting. I'm sure it's all the the little
mocap.
They're all covered in the stickers. Yeah, they're doing all the mocap stuff.
Do you think they did?
So
mocap
I think there's a lot more to it. Oh, sure, absolutely.
Really?
Oh yeah, I mean there's so much acting going on with all these characters. I'm sure it was all mocap.
That's cool. That's a concept that I just assumed that it wasn't.
Well, knowing that Spielberg also is very much kind of a buddy with Robert Zemeckis, who's been known for all the mocap work that he's done. And Spielberg did The Adventures of Tintin, which was mocap. I mean, I think he does a lot of really great. I mean, he understands the tools, and I think he made great use of them here.
Motion capture has become, because it's become so much more prevalent, it's actually cheaper to do that than to try to create a CG character that's believable out of whole cloth. It's better to actually have those kind of references on an actual actor, and then have a computer make it beeps and boops.
Interesting. That's a huge. Well, it's probably not a new shift, right? But it's a shift in my thinking, in the way that I look at graphics and the way things are done, especially if it is coming from motion capture, as opposed to artist and artist rendering. So we talk about those characters. I guess then maybe they were a little bit more real in the way that they were doing their digital references there. The way they interacted with each other. How did you feel about that? Artemis and Parzival's relationship, was it believable?
For me, ironically, the guy who doesn't like fake things and fake things, I found all of the stuff in the Oasis between the characters captivating. And I didn't feel that way in real life.
Yes,
it was the complete opposite of what I normally feel.
Exactly. I'm right there with you, Tommy. It was like you got these two actors in a room together, and there's no chemistry between them at all. But somehow they had a more lively relationship in the Oasis, which to me seems like it's the problem is that's so counter to what the story is trying to say, because their relationship is the online fake relationship feels more real and true than in real life, those two, because I got nothing between the two of them. Even the point at the last shot of the movie of the two of them sort of like snuggling in that chair, it's like they're kissing, and then it's like there's this like weird, awkward tension between them. I'm like, this does not feel like either of them is comfortable with this at all.
I was like, how about you get on a chair in the Oasis?
Yes.
You guys look a lot.
Exactly.
You guys just look better and act better together in the Oasis, and you're probably spinning around on a
gosh.
chair in space. Yeah.
Yes. The one performance that worked really well for me, and I don't know if it was intentional, was Ben Mendelsohn as Sorrento. I don't know what it was, but throughout the movie, he reminded me of Richard Vernon, the principal from The Breakfast Club. I don't know if it was his hair. Yeah, there was something about that performance. I thought he's just channeling that character, but it fit so perfectly for who he is, of the guy that's trying to connect with the kids, but really can't, and he's trying to talk their language, and he's just in a different world altogether. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but I just kept getting this Richard Vernon vibe off of him, but it worked well. That was the one thing where I thought
cracking skulls.
Exactly.
Ben Mendelsohn, I think, has just been doing such a great job of playing bad guys in films lately. I really enjoy watching him, and like the weird fake teeth that they gave him that made him kind of talk a little awkward.
Yeah.
It was a strange choice, but I kind of liked it. There was something about just all the elements of his portrayal that I think worked just really well. I mean, I enjoyed Ty Sheridan and Olivia Cooke. For the most part, I think I have to agree with you guys that they seemed to work better in the Oasis than outside the Oasis. And it's frustrating because I enjoy both of them as performers.
Agreed.
But
It kind
But
maybe they were directed that way because that's what the
it's
film.
possible,
I'm joking. I'm actually trying to bring up my old point about the fact that they didn't have chemistry, so they wanted them to have more chemistry in the Oasis to make a point about society that we're getting. No,
right.
Just,
the way.
I will say the relationship that I really did enjoy watching on screen was Simon Pegg and Mark Rylance.
Oh yeah,
as Halliday and his former partner. I loved all those little scenes. First, I loved the way they shot those scenes. I loved the way that relationship played out in all those kind of videos, and then just the quiet moments that we had with Simon Pegg right at the end. It was really just a touching way to kind of see that relationship play out over the course of this story.
Simon Pegg in that very last scene after they're getting out of the van, and he has like 5 or 6 sentences. That was the most emotion I felt in the entire film. Like, what a superhero to be able to do sort of his lip quiver when he's talking about how the most important thing is to not lose a friend. I just thought I was like, oh, Spielberg's back.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, this is the Spielberg that I usually have, where you can take small moments. The movie is fine to sit for a second and really have some resonance. But I thought, yeah, I agree with you, Andy. I thought that Simon Pegg was great. And Mark Rylance was it's a really brave performance to be so spacey and so non-showy. And almost, it seems like he's somewhat on the spectrum, potentially. I don't remember if he was in the book at all. But I thought they were the two that really shined the most in the movie.
How about the comedy? That was mostly delivered by T.J. Miller and Lena Waithe on opposite sides, right? You have H, the character that is a little bit of a scam in that she's a big monstrous beast in the virtual world, and she's not as monstrous, not as scary in person. And then you have T.J. Miller, who we don't get to see in real life, but he's a crazy skull-bodied hitman. They're both delivering a lot of the comedy in the movie. How'd you guys feel about that?
I enjoy the characters. I thought they treated them well. I struggled a little bit with H's voice. I mean, the whole gag about, thinking it's a guy the whole time and then revealing, oh no, it's just this woman. It was like, okay, I really liked the reveal in the book. Here, I just felt like I struggled with the way that they did the voice because it sounded so artificially modulated and kind of
it was like
sometimes.
Bane,
but yeah,
right,
exactly.
When Bane in the opening of that Batman movie,
Yeah.
where I'm like, am I supposed to be understanding what he's saying? If he's saying anything important, we have a problem.
But I mean, they are fun characters though, and I think that's where the movie works really well when you just have kind of a lot of this fun sort of stuff. And so to that end, I find it very easy to fall into, just enjoying characters like H and IROC because they're there just as part of the entertainment. I think.
I think IROC, that was the issue I had because I know that's not a character in the book. So I was really interested in who the real person is behind IROC, because we get to see everybody else, all the featured characters, we get to see them, and we never get to see who IROC was. And then as I thought about that, after watching the film, I thought, well, that's too much work to have to do because really the character of IROC is just a plot device. He doesn't really, he's there to, do certain things to move the plot along, but he really has he doesn't need a person behind him because there's nothing there to him. I mean, it's TJ Miller. He's fun. He's a very recognizable voice, and it's like, yeah, that's who it is. And I was entertained by him. But when I came back to the story of he's this sort of mercenary character, who's behind that? Because so much of this is about the contrast between who people are in the Oasis and what they are in real life. I felt like they really dropped the ball on that one. It would be interesting to see who that person is that's really pivotal to the whole battle that's going on.
Well, and that plot device really gets us into the crux of the fake things.
Real quick,
fighting.
JJ, if I can jump in real quick about TJ Miller, just going conspiracy theory wise, I was always assuming we will see him in deleted scenes. TJ Miller has become more of a controversial figure as of late during the Me Too movement. Is there a chance that maybe there were actual scenes of TJ Miller doing things and Spielberg decided to take those out so we just hear his voice?
Ooh.
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't know if that's I'm just chasing a theory like a hound, but it's chasing a theory like a hound. That's not a phrase. But I mean, he is a controversial figure and being dropped out of Silicon Valley and stuff. It's just a possibility that maybe just enjoy his voice, but let's not bring him into this family friendly.
They're reshooting his scenes with Kevin Spacey. I think that's what we'll see is there'll be a Kevin Spacey version. I mean, not Kevin Spacey. Dang it. Wrong joke.
Christopher.
Weirdly, that made it funnier.
Christopher Plummer. Yes. Christopher Plummer. Dang it.
I think
they'll have to throw him into Deadpool 2. Also.
Yeah, he's still in there. Yeah.
One quick note. IROC was in the book, Steve. He's just
he was?
Yeah, he's a big talking character in the chat room where they all hang out. But he's not really a prevalent
That's
character.
right. Yeah, that's
they
right.
just gave him a major
Okay.
makeover here.
Well, and if we dismiss the conspiracy theory and we think about that, he is the exclusive fake thing character in the movie. We had a little bit of a debate, or at least we went down the rabbit hole a little bit in Black Panther, talking about, which was last month, about how we as old fuddy-duddies have a problem with fake things fighting fake things, but the next generation or the kids that are going to see these movies are so open to it that it's actually exciting for them in a way that we can't really understand. This movie, for me, it's a lot like you said at the beginning, Tommy. This was the most fake thing versus fake thing feeling that I ever had, and I felt the most disconnected from it in that way too. So I'm hyper aware of the fact that other people are going to see this movie and not feel the way I did. What can we do as film audience members to do a better job of accepting that this is the way that things are going to be in the future? And how do we get excited about watching, that spin cam stuff, or following the scene that we talked about in Black Panther is them fighting each other on their way to the ground as they fall, right? The fake thing fall, that kind of thing. How can we do a better job as film watchers of getting excited the way that the rest of the world does?
Get off my lawn.
Well, here's my opinion, because I don't have as much of a problem. I think the issue is that it's just a technology that is still in development largely. And I mean, if we talked to people back in the 30s when they were watching some new special effects, after initially they're like, "Oh, that's just amazing! Look at that giant ape on the top of the Empire State Building. It looks so real." But then after they've seen it for a few other, half dozen movies or several dozen movies, they're probably at the same time like, oh, this stuff just looks so fake. When is it going to start looking better? I just can't buy into it anymore. And it's just one of those things where it's this constantly developing technology. And I think as it continues, it's going to get to a point where you're not going to notice. And I think there might be a place that we're at right now where we've seen so much of it. It's just so prevalent in all the films that we're watching because of the types of movies that are just so popular right now, that we're seeing so much of it. And because people like to see it and they throw it in there, and it works in context of good stories, but sometimes the stories aren't as good, and then it really becomes noticeable. But as the technologies continue developing, and you'll hopefully stop noticing that as they go on play with new toys, and it'll still just fall back to, as long as the story is good, you just aren't necessarily going to notice that stuff anymore.
I love what Andy just said, and to repeat something that I've said before, because these new toys are new toys and they're going to be moving on, just because that the same thing that I used to say about The Hobbit, just because you can doesn't mean you should. That I think that once you get over, hopefully directors will continue, and a lot of directors really are. And Marvel is so much of Marvel, like the Russo brothers and stuff, are using these abilities, but in a grounded, smart way. Just because you can send the camera on an insane Matrix-like spin around people, but that's not giving you anything. There's just a lot of real estate. It's not giving you actual a move forward in the fight or an interesting new way of looking at something. My hope is that also, while the audience, JJ, I agree, while old people like us need to evolve, that also filmmakers need to evolve and say, okay, I can do X, Y, and Z. Let's make X, but really interesting in a new way. That's my hope, is what they will use these things for that.
And what you're saying about this movie in particular, there wasn't a whole lot that they had to do so much in the digital realm because it's a virtual geography for the bulk of the book, the bulk of the source material. So there was a lot of it that they had to do. So there wasn't a whole lot of Y and Z that they could pull out. They actually had to do a lot of it. But there were things, spins and things like that were indulgent as well. So I think your point is well taken. That as long as we choose to do it creatively, it's a good thing.
And Spielberg said this was the hardest movie he's made since Saving Private Ryan.
Really?
Because just the quantity of the visual effects and all the technologies and all the meetings with ILM and everything, just trying to really map it out. I can understand it. And so I think to that end, even a director like Spielberg having a difficult time making a movie, I mean, inevitably we're going to have some stuff that we end up struggling with a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. Moving on to the music. Someone mentioned here that they heard the Back to the Future theme
the
when
twinkle.
they used the Zemeckis cube.
Yes.
I didn't hear that.
Several
Oh, yeah, no,
times.
They also
so
use that
great.
in the trailer. I know, Steve, you don't watch trailers, but they use that as the button of all the trailers for the movie.
Which
Which was sweet.
Alan Silvestri did the score, and he did Back to the Future, and I've been listening to the Ready Player One score today, and as I'm listening to the different tracks, I'm like, oh yes, here I'm getting that Back to the Future feel, because we also have the DeLorean in the car chase. So there were, to me,
Yeah, when it wins the race,
there
you
was
hear
a
it.
lot
Cool.
of that came through, and it was interesting to see how much of Back to the Future there was in here, because again, that's not. I know Spielberg's associated with that. He didn't direct that, but that's, I think, the most Spielberg presence we get in the film, because there's not a lot from, because I know he intentionally tried to keep out as much of his stuff as he could, although the crew members kept trying to put things in. And there's an interesting article in Entertainment Weekly about this, that, you know, once they got in the digital realm, it was really easy for them to start sneaking stuff in. When you're on the practical set, it's real easy for them to say, now get that gremlin out of here. We're not putting that in the shot. But when it's your computer, they can just start dropping stuff in. And I think there's stuff that got snuck in, but his goal was to not make this so much about the things that he had already created. So that was.
So we're not the only ones that didn't catch all of the illusions.
Oh,
The
no.
director probably missed some of them too.
Oh, I'm sure.
Maybe that's why the camera's moving so gosh darn fast the entire time. It's because they're just
Don't let
getting-
him see that.
Yeah, like the girl in the red dress from Schindler's List is like out there on the battlefield.
She's in the back.
Too soon. All right.
Well,
Tommy's
Another
joking,
thing
but it's
that-
probably in there somewhere. I'm sure she's out on the battlefield running around.
That's such a strange homage. I don't know. Another thing that made it hard for me to watch the movie is that my theater experience was super terrible. I don't know why. I saw it at my local theater. It's the place that I always see it. But something that's really important to me, and jumping from the music thing, is music cues. And in particular, the Van Halen jump music cue and the Bee Gees Staying Alive music cue were just quiet. It's almost like they were background noise. The way it sounded in the theater was as if the people on screen were listening to it, as opposed to it being the emotional, effective thing that it was. So all the sound was just a wash in this theater for me. And, you know, those earlier weird comments that I was making about the quality of the resolution and stuff like that, that also could be because of my negative theater experience. I haven't had this kind of negative theater experience in probably more than 10 years. And I was surprised at how much it colored my opinion about the movie. It made it feel like the movie was kind of weak and not really as good as it could be. So what were your guys' experience like? My theater wasn't packed, but everybody was laughing a lot. Did you guys have anything particularly interesting about your theater experience?
We had we saw it at the 6:00 show in IMAX 3D Friday night, and there was probably 30 people in the auditorium, which just, I was flabbergasted that opening night there were so few people in the auditorium. I really couldn't figure it out. That aside, the picture, the 3D quality was spectacular.
Nice.
I had such a great ride in the 3D realm with this film. Everything in the Oasis just really lived perfectly in 3D. Everything from just, the entrance to it as you're flying through everything, to the shining bit, to just all of the stuff, the big climactic battle. It was just really spectacular in 3D. I had a blast with that. And the sound quality, it was really great. I mean, it was a really well designed full world. So I would say definitely try to see it again in an IMAX screen or Dolby Atmos or something where you get a better sound quality than you did.
Okay. I saw it in Atmos, and I know Andy was interested in hearing about my experience in Atmos because of the Speakeasy with the other Andy Nelson. And unfortunately
right.
for me, this is a case, just as Tommy said, it's just a wash of things. And to me, and I think Andy mentioned this in the Speakeasy, what he likes about Atmos is it's better for quieter films because of the precision you can place things. And to me, it was a wave of sound. So I didn't get a strong sense of, things being placed in specific places. It was a very immersive experience, but when you think of things like the car chase, there's just so much going on visually to pinpoint any one thing. Same thing with sound. It's truly an immersive experience, but there was nothing that really stood out for me. I guess if I were to experience it in just a non-Atmos, I might be able to give you a comparison to talk about sort of the depth of the sound feel, but there was nothing specific that I could point out to say, wow, I really felt this. It was just, again, sort of 360 wave of sound all around me. The only, my audience did laugh. The loudest outburst was from a guy, to my left, about 3 seats. And it's when they're hanging out in H's sort of garage, and they're just talking, but on the wall there's 2 posters. One is like Will Wheaton, like some type of wanted poster, but on the other side there's Mayor Goldie Wilson, and the guy out loud he's like, Mayor Goldie Wilson, that's awesome. Didn't care that he was in an auditorium with a couple hundred people, but yeah, he just let everybody know he thought that was the funniest thing ever.
And that man was
awesome.
Steven Spielberg.
Well, I think it's interesting too that we had these kind of like half empty theaters, because I mean, it's number one both Thursday and Friday. It was number one, and they're saying it made 17 million here locally or in the US, and it's going to make 68 million worldwide just in the first weekend. That's what they expect. So it seems odd, because there definitely there weren't any lines, there wasn't any sort of clamoring to get in my local theater.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. I guess, I don't know. Maybe it's just playing on so many screens that it's easy to get into. Like, I don't know. It's just a strange
Andy,
thing.
that's my guess. At least, Los Angeles sometimes is different than other towns, but in my ArcLight that I go to, it was playing every half hour on the half hour. They devoted so many screens to it that there's no way to. The fact that the theater wasn't packed doesn't mean that people aren't going to see it. So.
Right.
Awesome to hear. Well, I think that we've kind of talked a whole lot about it. Maybe it's time for us to rank it.
Let's do it.
Player 1, we are ready now. Done with our yammer. Now time to rank it on Flick Chart, and we'll see how it compares to Finest Hours and Child 44. Now it's time to rank it. Super Mario Brothers, y'all. Flick Chart.
That's just brilliant.
Check out www.flickchart.com to try out what we're going to do here. The site provides a fun way to look at movies you've seen by creating a tournament-style stack ranking system that organizes movies of your choice into a very custom March Madness all your own. The movies we've talked about on this show can be seen ranked at flickchart.com/TNR Film Board. Where do we start?
All right, first up, we have Ready Player One, or Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice.
Ready Player One.
Yes, Ready Player One.
Ready Player One.
I'm just going to tell you guys for just I guess nostalgia, or no, for history. This is the first time that I've ever voted for BVS Doge.
Wow.
I liked that movie more than Ready Player One. So
look at that.
But it doesn't matter because you guys chose Ready Player One.
All right, next up, Ready Player One or Fury.
Fury.
Ready Player One.
Sorry, guys. Ready Player One.
What? What? Brad Pitt in a tank? Wow. Okay.
Tommy and Steve, you guys have to do Rochambeau on this one.
1, 2, 3.
Paper.
Okay, so Steve wins, so Fury wins.
What?
So Fury wins.
I demand a revote. Fake news.
Way to go,
Fake
Tommy.
News.
Ready Player One or Looper.
Looper.
I'm going to say Ready Player One.
Because I don't love Looper. Yeah.
You don't love Looper?
I don't love it. It's okay.
Wait, Steve no love Looper? That's funny.
No love.
Steve no love Looper. Steve why no love Looper? Okay, I'm just
The forehead. That's why Steve doesn't like Looper.
Yeah,
No idea.
Okay. So
Ready
and Tom.
Yes. Yeah.
Do your rock, paper, scissors, please.
Okay. Are you ready? Oh, it's not you, JJ?
No, I guess I should do it because Tommy did it last time. Andy counted down. I'll do it this time.
All right. 1, 2, 3.
Scissors.
Rock.
There it is.
Okay. So
I crushed
Ready
you.
Player One works.
Ready Player One takes it.
Yeah.
Ready Player One or World War Z?
World War Z.
World War Z.
Yeah, World War Z. Ready Player One or Spectre?
Spectre.
Ready Player One.
Ready Player One for me.
What's Spectre?
James Bond.
The
latest James Bond movie.
Oh, abstain.
Oh, okay. So Ready Player One works.
Ready Player One or Captain America: Civil War?
Captain America,
Civil
Civil
War.
War.
Civil War. Yes.
I'll say Ready Player One, but it doesn't really matter.
Oh, Steve, no love Looper.
That's going to be a new ringtone somewhere.
Just what I was going to say.
Whenever someone's disappointed by something, we should say,
Oh, Steve, no love
Steve,
Looper.
no love
Oh,
Looper.
Steve, no love Looper. All right, well, that lands Ready Player One at number 23
Oh,
on our
okay.
chart. 23 out of 68.
Oh, so it's still in the top half. That's interesting.
Yeah, 66%.
So I will tell you that my Letterboxd ranking did change after talking to you guys about it. You guys had some great insights about it. I was super low on the movie coming out. I was a 2 coming out. I'm a 2.5 now, but I still don't like the movie. It still let me down, and I do believe that it was colored mostly by how much I liked the book and how much I didn't get from the movie. So I'm 2.5 and not like for me.
Okay.
I give it a 3-star rating and a like, or love, or heart, or whatever symbol it is that we attach to that.
Tommy?
And I will give it a 3.5 and a like.
And I will also give it a 3.5 and a like.
Friends.
Cool.
So that's
Three-ish.
3.125. So it'll land at 3 and a like on our letterbox.
Gotcha. Well, where do we go from here? Next month, it's April, and we're going to see Beirut, we're doing the show on my birthday, which I'm super excited about because everything I always wanted was a political drama based on real-life events that's been criticized for its lack of accurate ethnic representation and being released on the anniversary of the massacre that started the Lebanese Civil War.
Happy birthday, JJ!
Wow.
So I'm really excited to talk about it. No, I don't know or am not particularly excited about Beirut. But that being said, I think we're actually set to have a real stirring conversation about sensitivity and accuracy and their role in entertainment and film because of all of the press that Beirut's getting. So we're doing that show on April 14th. And so it should come out on should be released to the public the week after in April. For the Mothership Show on TNR, Andy, you guys are still seeking revenge, right?
Yeah, we're wrapping it up next week with with Lady Vengeance. So it's the last of the unofficial Park Chan-wook Vengeance trilogy.
Awesome.
Very, very cool. Thanks again to you guys for winding your way through another show here with me. We'll meet you right back here next time. Thank you. Good night, Andy Nelson.
Ciao.
Get some rest, Tommy Handsome.
Will do. Thank you very much, JJ.
And I will catch you in the stream, Steve Sarmento.
Hondo.
Thank you all so very much for listening here, and reach out to us to tell us everything that we got wrong tonight on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, because rock and roll stops the traffic. And remember, for as little as $1 per month, you can support us on patreon.com/thenextreel. Make sure to connect with us there and join our fun forest of film frolic. Woo! Fantastic. At the next reel, when the movie ends, our conversation begins. Till next.